The ultimate bluff has just been called, and the United States military has just shattered the illusion of Iranian supremacy in the Middle East. For weeks, the world has held its collective breath. For weeks, a desperate, cornered, and increasingly paranoid regime in Tehran claimed that they had rigged the world's most critical waterway with a deadly, inescapable web of underwater mines. They drew a line in the sand. They dared the United States. They dared global shipping. They dared the free world to cross that line. They promised fire. They promised sunken steel. And they promised a disruption to the global economy so severe that it would bring the West to its knees. But this morning, in broad daylight, under the blazing sun of the Middle East, the full might of the United States Navy delivered an answer that echoed across the globe. Heavily armed American warships, flying the stars and stripes, sailed directly into the belly of the beast. They carved right through the Iranian chokehold, transiting the Strait of Hormuz, slipping into the Persian Gulf, and coming right back out. And the response from the Iranian military? Absolute, humiliating silence. Not a single shot was fired. Not a single vessel dared to intercept them. The Grand Iranian Blockade, the terrifying minefield that was supposed to keep American power at bay, was exposed as either a complete fabrication or a catastrophic failure of Iranian military competence. This is a monumental shift. This is the very first time an operation of this magnitude has taken place since this brutal war began, and you have to understand the timing of this masterstroke. This absolute display of unbothered American naval dominance is happening at the exact moment when the Iranian regime is bleeding leverage, fighting for its political survival, and desperately craving a negotiated deal that allows them to save face. Let us look at the reality of the diplomatic chessboard right now. For days, the Ayatollah's mouthpieces have been screaming to the international press. They complained bitterly about the parameters of the ceasefire. They threw diplomatic tantrums. They issued public ultimatums explicitly threatening to back out of all peace talks entirely unless the United States bent to their will. Their demands were steep, arrogant, and uncompromising. First, they demanded that America force Israel to implement an immediate unconditional ceasefire in Lebanon. Second, they demanded the immediate unfreezing of billions of dollars in sanctioned Iranian assets. They wanted their blood money back, and they wanted their proxy armies protected. They swore up and down that if these red lines were not met, there would be no negotiations. But talk is incredibly cheap when American warships are cutting through your territorial claims. Despite all the chest pounding, despite all the fiery rhetoric, Iranian officials did exactly what desperate people do. They swallowed their pride, they abandoned their ultimatums, and they showed up to the negotiating table anyway. In fact, the sequence of events is almost comical in its revelation of Iranian panic. The Iranian delegation actually arrived in Islamabad, Pakistan, before the American plane even touched down on the tarmac. They were waiting. They were eager. The very next day, the United States delegation, operating entirely on American time and American terms, made its descent. Vice President J.D. Vance stepped off the plane, projecting an aura of total calm and absolute control. He took his time. He met with Pakistani state officials, observing the diplomatic formalities, projecting strength, while the Iranian delegation sat in their hotel rooms, waiting for the Americans to grant them an audience. We are going to dive deep into exactly who the Iranians sent to these negotiations, because the passenger manifest of that Iranian diplomatic flight tells us a story of a regime that is terrified of the future. But before we dissect the diplomacy, we have to talk about the sheer audacity of what happened on the water this morning. You need to visualize the Strait of Hormuz. It is not just a body of water. It is the jugular vein of the global energy market. It is a narrow, treacherous stretch of sea where 20% of the world's liquid petroleum passes through. It is the ultimate strategic choke point. To control the strait is to hold a gun to the head of the global economy. This morning, 2 heavily armed United States warships executed a flawless transit from east to west, slicing through the strait, entering the highly contested waters of the Persian Gulf, completing their patrol, and turning right back around to exit into the Arabian Sea. This is the first time since the outbreak of major hostilities that American warships have brazenly entered the Persian Gulf. Now, if you listen to Tehran's propaganda machine, you will hear a very different, deeply embarrassing alternate reality. There is one prominent Iranian state media outlet currently broadcasting to its domestic audience that this American transit never happened. They are spinning a desperate fairy tale, claiming that the American warships tried to enter, but the brave and mighty Iranian Navy issued a stern warning, struck fear into the hearts of the American sailors, and forced the US Navy to turn its ships around and flee. It is pure, unadulterated fiction. This is the exact same Iranian state media outlet that has been caught fabricating stories, doctoring footage, and lying through its teeth multiple times in just the last 3 weeks alone. Their credibility is less than zero, and we do not just have to rely on the word of the Pentagon. 3 independent, highly respected global defense publications have already confirmed the transit. They have verified that the 2 U.S. warships successfully navigated the strait, entered the Gulf, and exited without a single scratch. Furthermore, in the age of modern technology, you cannot hide thousands of tons of American steel. Open-source intelligence analysts and satellite data tracking have definitively mapped the location data of these warships. The digital footprint is undeniable. The journey took place, and it did not happen under the cover of darkness. It did not happen under the shroud of a communications blackout. This was a multi-hour military mission executed in broad, blinding daylight. Their transponders were fully active. They were broadcasting their position to the entire world. It was the maritime equivalent of kicking down the front door and daring the occupants of the house to do something about it. Everyone could see it. The global shipping conglomerates could see it. The militaries of neighboring Arab states could see it. And most importantly, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps could see it on their radar screens. If Iran possessed the capability, the willpower, or the courage to actually enforce their supposed blockade, they had hours to act. They had every opportunity to launch fast attack craft, to fire anti-ship missiles, or to deploy their naval assets. But they did nothing. They sat in silence and watched American power roll right past their shores. United States defense officials have explicitly confirmed that this naval transit was entirely uncoordinated with Iranian authorities. There was no back-channel heads-up. There was no polite request for permission. The United States military did not ask to use the waterway. They asserted their inherent, undeniable right to navigate international waters. They went in, and they came out. Now, the exact operational parameters of this mission remain classified. We do not know the highly specific tactical objective those ship captains were handed. Was this a calculated psychological operation? A blunt message delivered in steel and wake, proving to Tehran that the United States military has absolute free reign over the strait, now that a ceasefire framework is in play? Perhaps. Were these warships acting as heavily armed escorts, shadowing a high-value tanker into the Persian Gulf to load up on American-bound oil, ensuring that not a single Iranian speedboat dared to approach? That is highly probable. Or were they actively engaging in mine-clearing operations? This brings us to one of the most bizarre, almost unbelievable subplots of this entire conflict. For weeks, the Iranians have loudly boasted about their underwater minefields. Just 2 days ago, on April 9th, an Iranian deputy foreign minister gave an interview where he explicitly laid out Tehran's extortion racket. He stated with a straight face that all international ships wishing to pass through the Strait of Hormuz must establish direct communication with the Iranian military. Why? Because of what he called technical restraints and limitations in the water. He claimed the strait is narrow, that it falls entirely within Iranian and Omani territorial waters, and that because of wartime conditions, it will take significant time for these so-called technical restrictions to be removed. He was offering a mob-style protection racket: coordinate with Iran, bend the knee to our authority, and we will grant you safe passage through our invisible minefield. He claimed Iran possessed the master map of these naval mines, making them the sole arbiters of who lives and who sinks. But here's where the story shifts from a terrifying threat to an absolute farce. Just yesterday, devastating investigative reporting from the New York Times revealed a jaw-dropping intelligence assessment. The Iranian military is completely unable to locate the underwater mines they themselves supposedly planted. Let that sink in. The regime that threatens to annihilate its enemies cannot even find its own ordnance. How does something like this happen? Intelligence circles are floating 2 highly plausible scenarios. The first is that the Iranian military structure is so deeply corrupt, compartmentalized, and incompetent that they simply dump these mines into the turbulent currents of the strait without ever bothering to chart their coordinates. They created a blind hazard that is just as dangerous to their own vessels as it is to anyone else. The second scenario is even more telling of American lethality. The theory goes that the specific Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps commander, the singular engineer who oversaw the mining operation and held the highly classified map, was recently vaporized. When American precision-guided munitions rained down on Iranian command and control centers weeks ago, this commander sought refuge deep underground in a reinforced bunker. The American bunker busters found him anyway, burying him and his precious map under thousands of tons of concrete and pulverized rock. Because of this catastrophic failure in Iranian command, a prominent theory has emerged over the last 72 hours. Defense analysts have begun to seriously question whether Iran ever actually deployed a massive minefield at all. Did they just drop a handful of dummy mines, issue terrifying press releases, and rely on the psychological terror of the unknown to freeze global shipping? It is a brilliant, albeit cowardly, asymmetric warfare tactic. Civilian oil tankers insured for hundreds of millions of dollars are not going to risk sailing into a reported minefield without absolute proof that the water is clear. Iran effectively blockaded the most important economic waterway on the planet using nothing but rumors, shadows, and fear. But whether the mines are real, fake, or lost to the currents, the United States is not leaving anything to chance, nor are they leaving the narrative in the hands of Tehran. President Trump himself issued a definitive, forceful statement this morning. He confirmed to the world that United States military forces are, at this very moment, executing a massive, highly technical mission to actively clear the Strait of Hormuz. The objective is to rip away Iran's false leverage and reopen the seaways for international commerce, specifically paving the way for tankers to safely load up on American oil. Now, while I am not a naval warfare architect, and while it is an absolute certainty that the United States military possesses highly classified next-generation technologies that the public cannot even fathom, open-source data suggests that the two specific Arleigh Burke-class destroyers that transited the strait today are not primarily designated as mine countermeasure ships. They are floating fortresses of air defense, anti-submarine warfare, and land attack cruise missiles. This suggests two possibilities. Either these destroyers were providing an impenetrable shield of security for smaller, specialized, and highly vulnerable minesweeping vessels operating just out of sight, or their transit was a proof of concept. By sailing two massive warships right through the supposed danger zone, with their transponders glowing on every radar screen in the Middle East, the US Navy proved that the water is safe. This is a devastating blow to Iranian geopolitical leverage. Iran has publicly sworn that under no circumstances would they allow more than 15 commercial ships to pass through the Strait of Hormuz in a single 24-hour period. They wanted to artificially throttle the global energy supply to create economic pain in the West. Right now, maritime traffic remains suppressed, hovering near or below that arbitrary Iranian limit. But with American warships actively breaking the blockade and declaring the waters clear, that traffic is inevitably going to surge. And the moment that 15th ship sails through unharmed, Iran's power evaporates. But while the United States is securing the seas, a much darker, much more dangerous shadow war is escalating in the skies, and the fingerprints of the Chinese Communist Party are all over it. While the Iranian delegation sits in Islamabad pretending to negotiate in good faith, U.S. intelligence agencies have intercepted deeply concerning logistics data. Beijing is actively preparing to deliver a massive shipment of advanced new air defense systems directly into the hands of the Iranian military within the next few weeks. We are not talking about massive, radar-heavy, stationary surface-to-air missile batteries that American stealth bombers can easily target and destroy. Beijing is shipping AMPADs, man-portable air defense systems. These are advanced, shoulder-fired, heat-seeking missiles. They are lightweight, highly mobile, easily concealed in the back of a civilian pickup truck, and lethal. These are the exact weapons that pose the ultimate asymmetric threat to low-flying American aircraft, helicopters, and search and rescue teams. We cannot forget the tragic cost of this specific weapon system. During the harrowing high-stakes press conference following the daring American rescue mission just 1 week ago, President Trump stood before the nation and confirmed a heartbreaking reality. The American F-15 Strike Eagle that went down in hostile territory was not defeated by a superior fighter jet. It was not shot down by a massive military installation. It was brought down by a single handheld shoulder-fired missile. An Iranian manpad took an American warplane out of the sky. If Chinese cargo planes land in Tehran next week, loaded with crates of next-generation manpads, it will fundamentally alter the risk matrix for the United States Air Force. If these fragile ceasefire negotiations collapse, and given Iran's track record of deception, that is a very real possibility. The airspace over the Middle East will become infinitely more dangerous for American pilots. Beijing knows exactly what it is doing. They are bleeding American resources and complicating American military dominance without ever firing a shot themselves. This brings us to the absolute pressure cooker of the ongoing negotiations in Pakistan. We have received incredible behind-the-scenes details regarding the sheer size and makeup of the Iranian delegation, and it speaks volumes about the internal panic gripping the regime. Preliminary estimates indicate that Tehran has sent a staggering 70 people to Islamabad. This is not a tight, cohesive diplomatic team. This is a massive bloated entourage. They have brought economic experts desperately looking for sanctions relief. They have brought slick diplomatic operators trying to spin a narrative of peace. They have brought shadowy security intelligence operatives. And most tellingly, they have brought Mohammed Bagheri. Just yesterday, we discussed how the hardline zealots of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps were furiously demanding a seat at the table. They do not trust the civilian politicians, and they wanted their own enforcer in the room to ensure the IRGC's radical convictions were not sold out. Bagheri is that enforcer. The fact that the Ayatollah authorized a 70-person delegation incorporating every fractured competing faction of the Iranian power structure proves one thing: Iran is taking this incredibly seriously. They are out of moves, the economy is in freefall, their proxies are being systematically dismantled, and they are praying for a negotiated settlement that allows the regime to survive the year. Remember the grand Iranian ultimatums? The head of their delegation proudly declared to the world before boarding his flight that Iran would instantly pull out of the talks if two conditions were not met: a total ceasefire in Lebanon and the total unfreezing of sanctioned Iranian bank accounts. He drew a line in the sand and the United States stepped right over it. We know for an absolute undeniable fact that neither of those conditions has been met. The United States State Department explicitly stated that they never agreed to release a single dime of frozen Iranian funds as a precondition for talks. Not 1 cent of that sanctioned money has been transferred. The bank vaults remain locked. And as for a ceasefire in Lebanon, the sky over Beirut is currently burning. Even as the Iranian diplomats sip tea in Islamabad, the Israeli Defense Forces are unleashing an unprecedented wave of destruction upon Hezbollah. In just the last 24 hours alone, Israeli fighter jets, drones, and artillery have struck over 200 distinct Hezbollah targets. Ammunition dumps are exploding, rocket launch sites are being vaporized, and Hezbollah's command structure is being ground into dust. Despite their red lines being completely ignored, despite the US keeping their money locked away, and despite their most valuable proxy army being subjected to a relentless bombing campaign, the Iranians still got on the plane. They still flew to Pakistan, and as I record this broadcast on a Sunday morning, these diplomats have been locked behind closed doors for over 4 solid hours. Vice President J.D. Vance is sitting across the table from a desperate regime. American experts are locking horns with Iranian operatives. The optics are devastating for Tehran. My personal assessment, and you can look at the geopolitical chessboard and judge for yourself, is that the Iranian regime is suffocating. They made public threats to save face domestically, hoping the United States would flinch and offer preemptive concessions. The United States did not flinch. The US held a line of absolute titanium. They called the bluff. And Iran, realizing that the Americans were perfectly willing to let them walk away and suffer the military consequences, folded their hand and sat down at the table anyway. But there is a massive, incredibly volatile consequence to Iran's desperation. The leadership of Hezbollah and the people of Lebanon, whose country is currently a war zone, are watching this diplomatic theater unfold, and they are realizing a terrifying truth: Tehran has abandoned them. Hezbollah was the crown jewel of the Iranian proxy network. They believed Iran would protect them. They believed Iran would go to war for them. Instead, they are watching Iranian diplomats beg the Americans for sanctions relief, while Israeli bombs obliterate Hezbollah infrastructure. To Hezbollah, it looks like a total unforgivable betrayal. Iran threw them to the wolves to save their own regime. This fractures the entire axis of resistance. Iran's relationship with its proxy groups will never be the same. The trust is broken. The fear is gone. Hezbollah realizes that to Tehran they are nothing more than expendable cannon fodder. We are monitoring these closed-door negotiations in Islamabad by the minute. We do not yet have the leaked memos, the exact parameters of the discussions, or the specific points of friction. But the moment those doors open, the moment we get verifiable intelligence on what the United States demanded and what Iran surrendered, I will be bringing you an immediate, comprehensive update. Until then, we must look beyond the headlines of today to truly comprehend the madness of the Iranian regime. To understand why Tehran operates with this toxic mixture of supreme arrogance and deep-seated paranoia, you cannot just look at the Islamic Revolution of 1979. You cannot just look at the modern Ayatollahs. You must travel back through the centuries. You have to understand the ghosts of the Persian Empire. You have to look at the massive cascading failures of the Qajar dynasty in the 19th century. The disastrous decisions made by the ruling class over 150 years ago forged a national psychology of victimhood, anti-Western hatred, and relentless insecurity that drives every single decision Iran makes today. If you want to understand the enemy, you have to understand their history. And that is exactly what we are exposing in our massive, highly detailed, multi-part audio documentary that just dropped today. It is a deep dive into the historical forces that created the Iran we are fighting today. If you want to know the why behind the war, you absolutely need to listen to this. You can access it immediately by clicking the links in the description below or by simply tapping the video portal right here on your screen. The history will shock you, but it will make everything happening today make perfect sense. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and I will see you in the next briefing.